presidency. I read all the papers related to the ambitious program, people empowerment, safeguarding our planet, and shaping the new frontiers. And I think this is also very much related to the theme of our meeting as more sustainable and equitable development for the world. We are also very pleased to announce that we will be going to Saudi Arabia in the spring. For the first time also, the World Economic Forum's summit on the Middle East will take place in Saudi Arabia. It will be convened as a special meeting on the Middle East in the Fourth Industrial Revolution, 5th and 6th of April in Riyadh. So I would like to then present this very distinguished panel before we start the discussion. On my left-hand side, we have His Royal Highness, Minister of Energy, Al Saud. Then we have Finance Minister, His Excellency Al Jadaan. Then we have the Minister for Economy and Planning, His Excellency Tuwajiri. Then we have Her Excellency Minister of Commerce and Investment, Assistant Minister, Madam Al-Mutairi. And then, last but not least, Minister Al-Swaba, Minister of Communications and Information Technology. That's the future. So let's give them an applause and a warm welcome. Let me start with the Finance Minister, Al Jadaan. I mentioned some of the topics that are your priority, and I think everyone would then like to hear more. What is your game plan? How is this going to be a very successful G20 presidency, and what are your main priorities? We know that finance ministers are very result-oriented.
No, thank you very much, Borja, and I'm very pleased to be here, and I wanted to congratulate you on the 50th anniversary. We have enjoyed the last few days, and
Shukran.
Continues to really impress, so congratulations. G20 presidency have been assumed by Saudi Arabia at a time where the world faces serious challenges, and it is not limited to few, but I can name few, including geopolitical issues, trade tensions, disruptive technologies, climate change, and obviously a lot of debt vulnerabilities and inclusiveness issues. At the same time, the world is very much getting more and more connected, and therefore issues and challenges in one country can very easily move and transfer to another country, and that calls for the need to collaborate worldwide to ensure that we bring about solutions through consensus to the world challenges. That said, there are also a lot of opportunities around the world, and we wanted to make sure that we also, while tackling these challenges, we don't forget the opportunities that some of these challenges can bring. And so this is basically how we designed our agenda. We announced our agenda in December. The agenda, basically, main theme is realizing the opportunities of the 21st century for all. This is a very forward-looking to ensure that the world deals and work together to harness the opportunities of the 21st century, but also we don't forget the current challenges, and we need to deal and work and steer the globe, whether it is the G20 members, but also the wider globe, to reaching and collaborating and reaching consensus to some of these key challenges. Under that theme, there are three key aims that we announced. One is empowering people, and that obviously covers quite wide spectrum, including women, youth, SMEs, and the like, and the list even served segments of communities around the world. Second is protecting planet Earth, and this is a very important issue, whether it is oceans, whether it is land, and obviously in the center of it is the climate change and how we want to work with our partners, the G20 members, to actually advance the agenda of the climate change and mitigation and adaptation. And His Royal Highness and my colleagues will cover this. And the third and the most ambitious and forward-looking is basically shaping new frontiers and looking at technologies, looking at innovation and how can these advances be adapted to ensure that they are working for the human and for the people in the world. So these are the key elements of what our agenda is, and we will go obviously around to talk about the specifics on each of these.
Thank you, Minister. Just a short follow-up question. You're also Minister of Finance, and we know that the G20 has at certain points had to play a major role also in stabilizing the global economy. Especially, I think G20 played such a crucial role in 2008 during the financial crisis. We're not there now. We see a kind of global synchronized slowdown in the economy, but also IMF and Kristalina Georgieva in her report on Monday said we now see some silver linings there. We're not out of the woods yet, but there's some silver linings because of the more active monetary policy. We see some additional growth. How important will also the economic piece, making sure that we're keeping up the global growth be in your presidency?
It is very important, and it is a very significant part of our specific priorities. There are, in the finance track, key priorities that we will deal with, including inclusiveness, including supporting growth, sustainable growth. So there is a lot of work in that direction. We are more optimistic than we were last year. I think the world is more optimistic. When we met last year this time, here, I think the world was more pessimistic than today. We will also tackle under the finance track issues like debt vulnerabilities, and we will also deal with new issues that the world brings, which is digital taxation. The leaders of the G20 committed in the communique on 18 and in Osaka last year that they are committed to bringing about a solution to the digital taxation, which is actually a very important topic to support growth. Otherwise, countries would resort to bilateral action that will actually impact the economy, impact growth, impact the private sector.
Thank you. Minister of Finance was mentioning this realizing the opportunity for all. Your Excellency Al-Muttari, we know that women have traditionally not have the same rights as men in the kingdom, but there are a lot of changes now happening. How important will gender equality, gender inclusiveness, and be in the G20 presidency for the kingdom?
Thank you, Borge, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for hosting us. I think this has been a very important topic for Saudi Arabia. For us to be a member of the G20, Saudi Arabia is the only Arab country who is a member in the G20. For us to make the change and transfer this knowledge, we have to do the change ourselves in our country. Saudi Arabia this year has been announced to be a top performer in the Women, Business and the Law report announced just last week on the 14th of January by the World Bank. This actually says a lot. The change did not happen overnight. We had to work on changing the law, which is extremely important. If you want to actually make the change sustainable, it has to be through a legislative framework, through the law itself, to be sustainable and to continue. That also sends a signal to the rest of the Islamic world and the Arab world, and also our neighboring Gulf countries. We were actually a top performer and #1 on the Gulf countries. We were the second on the Arab world in our ranking on the Women, Business and the Law. The reason why we're doing this is we're very serious about the inclusiveness of the economy. When we talk about the economy, we only don't talk about gender, we talk about the different age groups, we talk about the gender, and we talk about including everybody, the unfortunate and others. And that was driving our agenda for the G20, and we really wanted to lead by example by doing so. It wasn't only about empowering women or enabling women or giving them the opportunity to play and to act in a level playing field. However, we understand that youth also needs to be educated and skilled and reskilled. There's definitely a gap in the world, not only in Saudi Arabia, because of the changing jobs in the world and the emerging jobs in the world that we have to reskill and keep on reskilling our youth and our women in the society, that we're also paying attention to that, and I think that also will drive the agenda for the G20. Saudi Arabia wants to act immediately on these changes because we believe that we can actually spread this good virus to our region and to our neighbors, and we will continue with our agenda. This is a journey. We have just started our journey, but we are committed to continuing the journey. Changing the law is one thing, but also putting strategies to empower women and to continue with the agendas of other G20 presidencies is very important. As you know, last year Japan has established the initiative of empowering women, and we are continuing to do so also in Saudi Arabia this year. We've established a working group for the W20 to continue with this initiative. We're also working very, very hard on empowering our SMEs, our entrepreneurs, our startups, building our incubators and accelerators. The Saudi women right now have established 20% of the entrepreneurs in Saudi Arabia and their businesses is something that we want to build on and grow. They have the capabilities, they have the will to do it. 50% of our graduate students are females. 54% of these females are actually in the STEM, learning science and technology. This is power for the economy that we need to build on.
Thank you very much. I think when you visit the kingdom, you can really see those changes even when you're driving. No, but there have been more changes in that respect the last 3 years than happened in decades. How long do you think it will take before you can come back in Davos and say that in Saudi Arabia today we have gender equality?
I can tell you that we have gender equality right now. We have actually managed to change all our laws in 6 weeks. This is unheard of anywhere else in the world. We were at the bottom of the list in the World Bank report, Women, Business and the Law. We have jumped to be at the average global level today. And this just happened in less than a year, actually, when they announced this. Now you see women builders, you see women welders, you see firefighters. You don't actually see men doing that right now, which is actually a competition that is being created by women establishing all these jobs and being creative and being courageous to get into these jobs. I think right now we have availed the laws, we have enabled them, we have empowered them. All what we need to do right now is to educate them, because we understand that there needs to be a lot of vocational training in leadership and training in finance and in artificial intelligence and big data and others to allow them to actually prosper into these fields.
Minister Tuwajri, also related to the G20 presidency, it is the importance of making sure that the Sustainable Development Goals are reached. We have agreed on overall goal by 2030 to eradicate all extreme poverty on our planet. We had a goal also on the Millennium Development Goals to halve the amount of people that live in extreme poverty, and we met that goal even 3 years before 2015. How much focus will your presidency also have on the Sustainable Development Goals and inclusive growth?
Thank you. I think, first of all, we're very proud with this presidency, but also we feel the responsibility. We talked about hosting the G20 in the Middle East. That by itself, I think, will shed a lot of light into the issues of the region, emerging markets in general. When we talked about the G20 challenges and the year 2020, I think uncertainty is top of the list. And that comes with the slow decision making. It comes with a lot of debates. I think what we're committed to when it comes to SDGs is to make sure there has been a lot of preparation going into the presidency. So in the last few days, for example, we engaged with so many institutions, policy-making bodies, and others to get their feedback. Within the preparation, we had started in early 2019 with Japan. So when you look at the 17 goals, every topic within the G20 agenda of Saudi Arabia is directly or indirectly have a track. So that's very important. But the more important topic is how can we be action-oriented toward these goals. Again, when it comes to financing, we realize also from the debates that access to capital and financing, especially in emerging markets, is not as easy as people may expect. So we thought, how can be also a responsible investor in some of the areas where these SDGs have more challenges than others. Again, our objective with this presidency is to be as much action-oriented, as much also practical in addressing the SDGs issues.
Thank you very much. Are you optimistic, Minister, that we can meet the SDGs by 2030, or are we lagging so much behind that it will be extremely difficult?
I think two things. One is that the world needs role modeling. They need hope. They need to see people who've actually done it. I can demonstrate today in Saudi Arabia that we have achieved a lot when it comes to the SDGs. So that's one. Second, I think it needs a collective effort. That collective effort starts with the debate. And again, talking about preparation, talking about how can we in Saudi Arabia, through this presidency, drive that debate by including the civil societies, by including the subject matter experts, the institutions that's related is also hopefully will help. So, short answer, I think we will achieve a lot by 2030, but that also depends on how other global bodies and institutions react as policymakers and as funding institutions to the whole SDG initiatives.
Let's make it into a decade of delivery, maybe.
We want also our presidency to be memorable in many ways, but also very practical.
Thank you. I'll then go to Minister Al-Shwah, Minister of Communications and Information Technology. We know that there is a lot of discussion globally, also among G20 countries on technology transfer, but also increasingly seeing that more and more countries understand that those that are on top of the new technologies related to the 4IR will also come out of this century as the most influential and prosperous countries. But at the same time, we also see very many important governance issues to this. How to make sure that artificial intelligence and the new technologies do also work in the interest of humankind. And will you take up that torch during your G20 presidency?
Thank you, Borghi. Digitalization undoubtedly is the largest economic multiplier and social equalizer. It's projected in the next 5 years, it's going to be a quarter of the global output. And every technological change we have seen, it has been a net new creator of jobs. WEF projects it's going to be 58 million jobs. And that's why, under shaping new frontiers, we need to steer collective effort. How we can come together because the prize is so big and the need is so urgent. And that's why we have, and we're going to go through a marathon in the next 10 months. Where the world is right now so polarized in the analog world, we need to come together in a digital fashion because there's growing inequality. We cannot celebrate here, Borghi and team, 50 years of the World Economic Forum, 50 years of the inception of the internet, yet half of the world is not yet connected. Yet half of the world does not have basic access to healthcare. In the kingdom, and I'll share with you an example, we have cracked the code on this 2 years back. We've launched telemedicine, in which in 2019, we touched 1 million lives, out of which 10,000 were very critical. We're taking this right now to Africa, but if we do not have a standard language and a common framework, we're going to face issues similar to what we're seeing right now across the globe as we're hearing from the different stakeholders, where if you go from one state to another within the same country, you cannot employ telemedicine. Move on from policies to infrastructure. There's $1 trillion from the carryover presidencies worth of funding needed to connect by 2030. This is the moonshot that we're working even closely with WIF, with the International Telecommunication Union, on closing the divide. On talent, 1 billion youth. Klaus yesterday spoke about it. This is something that we acknowledge, because we have seen once you double down on youth, on women, and technology, you see positive impact. And I'll share with you another example. Women participation in ICT, and Her Excellency shared it a little bit, jumped from 7% to 15%. And we have seen a positive correlation that our non-oil GDP grew double the base economy. So the base economy grew from a non-oil GDP by 3%, we saw 6%. So there's so much polarization today in the analog world, we cannot afford it in the digital. And that's why on topics such as AI ethics and trustworthiness, as we move from the 4th Industrial Revolution to the 5th Industrial Revolution, we want to make sure that this digital economy task force is historic.
Thank you very much, Minister. Just a short follow-up on your last point, that there is so much polarization in the analog world, so we cannot afford to have the same in the digitalized world. I think this is really very well coined and is important. But if you look at the reality, how concerned are you that this polarization in the analog world will also then lead to kind of a two-system in the digitalized world? Because we are seeing trade wars, we're seeing some steps in this direction, that we will have two different internets, things not being compatible. Can you fight this polarization in the digitalized world during your presidency?
We heard it today even in WEF from the who's who. There is indeed polarization, and we're steering this conversation towards consensus. So if I can boil it down, the 3 hot topics today that we're seeing is AI ethics, taxes, and cyber resilience. So on the ethics, there's 2 debates going on. Some folks that are pro-consumer, pro-privacy, and some folks that are pro-enterprise. But if we look at the intended use and the rights of use of data, there are cases where data can cure cancer, can detect early cases of cancer. And that's why we need to come to a consensus. And we're working closely with the 4th Industrial Revolution Center, and the next meeting is going to be in Riyadh and in San Francisco, on how we can get collective effort on having a common set of principles and positions. If I go back to cyber resilience, this is a topic we need to take it heads on. Because if we look at the WannaCry issue of 2017, if only one bank shared that piece of intelligence, that there has been a leak of some code to the shadow economy and to the dark web, we could have prevented WannaCry. And if I fast forward with quantum computing today, being able to de-encrypt in 5 to 10 years every encryption that we know today, we need to revisit how we reinforce trust among governments and among businesses. Last but not least, if I talk about the different topics of policies, really, we need to be in a world where we innovate, then regulate. Over-regulation today has been hindering innovation, prosperity across the globe, and we're very committed to throughout this journey.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I was tempted a very short follow-up question before we go to His Royal Highness. In the platform economy, it's the tendency that the winner takes it all. And we see some of the big platform economies are not in Europe or in the Arab world. How are you planning, also in Saudi Arabia, to take your share of this? What kind of policy do you have for making sure that you don't lose out on the 4th Industrial Revolution, in addition, of course, to the Center for the 4IR that we're establishing together in Riyadh?
I think if you look at the early discussions, the number of references that we have for a human-centric AI human centricity in smart cities. And across the board, you will find it in the dialogue today in the Saudi presidency, and to give credit to the previous presidencies. And I think the World Economic Forum have teed that up beautifully today by talking that we need to move by just looking at total shareholder returns to total stakeholder returns with stakeholder capitalism. And I think that's a beautiful segue to have this dialogue towards the end of the communiqué.
No, thank you so much. We have strongly underlined that when we move from capitalism to talentism, you also have to recruit the best talent, and the best talent wants also to work in companies that don't only look at the shareholders, but take broader responsibilities. Your Royal Highness, you have worked in the energy sector for decades and know this sector really well. When you have followed the discussion also here at our annual meeting, there is very clear that to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, to eradicate all extreme poverty, we also have to have energy for the 1.3 billion people on our planet that don't yet have electricity. At the same time, you have to decouple this growth also from the growth in CO2, then climate change. So very much looking forward to hear from you. Is it possible to deal with this, or is this a catch-22 situation?
No. First of all, I'm glad to be here, and I really had the pleasure yesterday of having a very productive exchange on that fossil fuel session. It was very productive and very engaging, and I hope that this platform can enable us to all to share our thoughts and ideas in the freedom that we need to, otherwise we would not be conceived as responsible citizens of this world. We're not newcomers to the G20. The fact that we were, from the first inception of the idea of the G20, Dr. Assaf is here and I are the old-timers here that can tell you a lot about since the day we were embarking in our journey of the G20. I think it came from all of our partners in the G20 as a recognition of Saudi Arabia of being a responsive player in the international world arena, both in multi-spheres, political, economical, and more important, in the energy sphere. This is where we have our niche, and this is where we have executed our and conducted ourselves in a manner consistent with, first and foremost, our own national aspirations and goals, and also being cognizant of the fact that as a supplier of energy, you really have to be mindful of what your customers and clients requires of you, expect of you. We're going beyond that by demonstrating in many occasions our ability to be the savior of the so-called concept of energy security. Still, until today, there is only one country in the world that have an excess capacity which is usable, and it has been used quite a few times as a way to mitigate any shortages of supplies that could have emanated from multi reasons. One of them is wars, conflicts, and economic disasters, and what have you, including industrial disasters. Be it as it may, we've been engaged, and we've been engaged proactively. The complexity of our engagement in the G20 emanates from the fact that we cannot see sustainable development, energy accessibility, and sustainability of energy supply and energy security, and all the components, including market stability, including sustainable energy systems as opposed to system, cannot happen without also being involved in the other debate, which has to do with climate change. And therefore, we as a Ministry of Energy, we are the handler of both. Energy, with all these four items that has been the issue of G20 discussions, and along with how you can do all of the above, yet maintain a good course of action in trying to attend to the issue of climate change in the most comprehensive way. Obviously, as a host of the G20, you need to be proactive, engaged, and also you should be mindful of the other attendance aspiration, priorities, and if you are to be a good host, an engaging host, you have to be forthcoming with ideas and suggestions, and also you have to be attentive to others' ideas and suggestions. We elected to go the extra mile by even going further and saying we have things to showcase as Saudi Arabia. We have things to demonstrate as Saudi Arabia, that we are not as the oil producer that is scared of demonstrating, exposing ourselves to the world. In fact, we would like to take this opportunity to demonstrate and exercise our ability to showcase what we are doing. And we honestly believe that if the whole world see what we are doing back home, attending to our own energy requirements, I would be not surprised at all that people think of this as what a reasonable, a sensible, responsible producer should do. In fact, I would not go beyond that. I think even consuming countries would take us as a model for what they could do. And I'll give you a few. You cannot attend to energy sustainability and security and accessibility and stability without looking at every option there is. We have to agree amongst ourselves that we have to be energy neutral, energy source neutral, that we will take all of the above choices. We will make sure that the winner takes it all through economic prism, through analysis, through feasibility studies. We cannot fiddle with the word energy mix without agreeing that we have to let this choice be going through what we have been taught by universities, which is feasibility study and the ability of people to accommodate to what is they're being naturally endowed with. We are well endowed with oil and gas and the sun, so we're making use of both, of the three of them. We also cannot sit on our hand as a producer and without advocating something that can bring solutions to the emission issues. We're cognizant of that fact. We're doing a lot of work. So we're doing as Saudi Arabia, but here we are talking about the G20 work. Otherwise, I would have spent hours explaining to you what we're doing in Saudi Arabia. However, we want to make sure that the world focus on every source of energy. We want to make sure that we eradicate energy poverty. Your number is correct about the billion. I'll give another number. 2.6 million of this world's citizens do not have accessibility to even a clean cooking fuel. Mainly it is in Africa and some in how could you talk about energy accessibility and when you have a big issue of energy poverty and when you have even the least meaningful way of cooking is not inexistent, which is more important. And that tells you a lot about the differences between priorities between the various players. So we want to make sure that if we are to be attentive to, yes, supply the world with every energy source there is, yet we have to mitigate emissions because, again, we owe it to ourselves, to the generations to come, that this world has to attend to all gases that cause climate change. And we use the word plural because it's not fair. There are things that are coming from industrialization, from the use of oil and gas, from the source of extraction, production, to the transportation, to all the way to the wheel. So it should be from the well to the wheel. And we can prove to the world that we're doing it all. We want to make sure that the whole world congregate around that principle. But we also want to make sure that the whole world congregate on we have to mitigate every source of emission and every gas emitted that do impact the climate change. And that's why we are advocating too many things. First, we will demonstrate within the next 2 months that we have a national program which has to do with circular carbon economy. I think we believe strongly in circular carbon economy as a way forward to mitigate most all of these gases that are coming from hydrocarbon sourced, including the carbon sequestration, including the whole process. In that endeavor, actually, we and others will be creating sources of industrialization. I know Norway is involved in carbon sequestration along with us. We want to, on the environmental agenda, again, we have 3 priorities. Managing emission from industry and food value chains, which, by the way, contribute to about 37% of these so-called emissions, and sustainable mobility. We have a place to showcase very soon, hopefully, in the form of NEOM. NEOM will be mainly renewable. We know that we're doing the work for NEOM on renewable. Hydrogen cars, will find it in NEOM. We are engaged in producing technologies that would harness the use of hydrogen. So, but mobility takes into everything, again, from the technology of providing you with more efficient fuel and more climate-friendly fuel. We're talking about the urban design of cities and how we can change that, including digitalization of the cities, just to make sure that it is enabling people to move without the impact that you see in urban cities, especially congested urban cities as Delhi or Bombay or even Riyadh nowadays. And there is also one low-cost approach, which is adaptation. Yesterday, the Colombian minister the energy Colombian minister was talking about what's wrong with mangrove, what's wrong with greening the whole world, what's wrong with putting more trees, what's wrong with coral beaches and protecting those. We owe it to the world even that there is so much desertification happening, and we should reverse that. We owe it that 20% of the, ever since the Industrial Revolution, 20% of the green area have gone. We owe it to the world that waste management and dumps should be attended to. I don't want to name countries by name, but there are miles and miles of dumping spots that needs to be cleansed and cleared to make sure that they become subject to irrigation and subject to farming, as opposed to being conceived as dumping spots. That's why we in Saudi Arabia have this initiative of 1 trillion trees to be grown by everybody. What we know of certainly that the G20 encompass most of the world economy, 78% of the emissions, the numbers are so huge. So if the G20 countries cannot move that agenda with a view and a vision where it is fair, equitable, and cognizant of the concern of all parties to make sure that everybody has that sense of ownership and therefore they can buy in. I don't know what we should be doing.
Thank you, Your Royal Highness. Just a short follow-up question. We only have 3 minutes left, and then I go to the Finance Minister at the end, just to share with us what would be the measures of success with you G20 presidency, so you can prepare for that, Your Excellency. But Your Royal Highness, adaptation, mitigation, cost effectiveness. I have a question related to also carbon capture and storage. Today, carbon capture and storage is not cost effective. It's too expensive. But look at solar. 10 years ago, it cost 10 times as much as today. And the fourth industrial revolution, technology, more effective manufacturing processes has driven down the price of solar to 1/10. And we see also the kingdom taking leadership here. More is coming from solar. We have some storage issues all over globally. But what do you think is the feasibility of carbon capture and storage? How to make it cost effective? How much investments do we have? Could it follow the same path as we have seen with solar? And will this be part also of your G20 presidency? And then we'll move to the Finance Minister.
Well, there is a going concern now. I don't know if you know that Saudi Arabia, Norway, the US are involved in the carbon sequestration forum. And that forum actually brings all of us together, sharing ideas, experiences, and even we talk to the private sector as also a proponent. That's why Aramco is carrying on a project on carbon sequestration. We are actually pushing the envelope even way better. When we first engaged in that forum, I was honored to have ability to be somewhat opinionated, and I asked our friends from the US that why can't we be engaged in adding U to the CCS, which is utilization. Why? Because we know that Aramco is actually experimenting with the idea of using CO2 as a way to enhance oil recovery as opposed to using water. And we have a project that is being executed. Actually, it has been at work now. Then we moved into the idea of, well, utilization of CO2 can go beyond that purpose to converting C as a material. So we do have programs. Aramco is handling a project, but we will be advancing on some other ideas, which I'm not going to share because I want to keep it for ourselves alone. But the idea, carbon is not wasteful. Carbon is a material that can be put to good use. If you talk to material engineers, they will tell you a lot of things that can be produced out of C. I used that as a speech, but I'm not going to go back to it. But we are trying to monetize every element of this hydrocarbon resource that we have. There is a case to be made. The engineers are there, they say it is doable. The finance are saying it is doable too.
Thank you very much, Your Royal Highness. That's a clear silver lining. I think we, through the panel, have really heard that there is a rich agenda for the G20 presidency. So my last question, and I see the time is out, but 1 minute summing up from His Excellency the Finance Minister. We know there are very good plans here, but everything comes to what I said, this has to be the decade of implementation. So how will you measure success of your presidency in Davos next year?
Thank you very much. I think there are a lot of ways that you could measure this, but I would say actually advancing the existing legacy issues that have been discussed through the G20 and actually making a more concrete, actionable outputs is one way of measuring success. Two is advancing some of the new ideas that Saudi Arabia is putting forward, whether it is in policy options or the like, where other countries, particularly the low-income countries, can use actually to advance their economy, is another way to measure it. And from our perspective, I think one way to measure it is actually to receive the G20 guests, to show them what Saudi Arabia is about, how hospitable the people of Saudi Arabia are, what can we offer as a country as we open to the world and as we open even the tourism industry, which plays a significant part of what Vision 2030 is and a catalyst for growth. So from a selfish point of view, we have actually a specific agenda in mind, but also for the G20 and the wider world, there is an ambition, and we need to work with our partners to come up with a consensus to the solution.
Small, short addition from His Royal Highness.
I can't help it. In every setting I've had, I keep saying, you can get your visa in 5 minutes. Seeing it is better than imagining it. Come over and visit.
Thank you. I think the panel deserves a big applause. Thank you so much. We're very much looking forward to see the outcome of your G20 presidency. Thank you. Shukran.